Tucked away, mainly hidden by cane fields, is the Newton Cemetery, where enslaved Africans, mainly from a nearby slave village, are buried. These slaves labored on the Newton plantation. The area was chosen for a burial ground because it was not suited for the growth of sugarcane, so it was given to the slaves to bury their loved ones. The Barbados Museum and Historical Society has responsibility for the site. Here's the Deputy Director of the museum, Kevin Farmer.
The Barbados Museum and Historical Society is in fact the site manager for the enslaved burial ground at Newton, which is situated in the southern part of Christchurch. Newton was a plantation which was created or established in and around 1660 and had an enslaved population there until emancipation in 1838. The persons who lived, worked, played, died on that plantation are buried within that burial ground. The enslaved burial ground is quite unique in Barbados because it is so far the only enslaved burial ground that has been recovered and located within a plantation on this island. That makes it a very unique site.
So, how was this site even discovered? Mr. Farmer explains.
In the late 1970s, two American researchers, a cultural anthropologists, and a physical anthropologist were trying to understand and were trying to find enslaved burial grounds in Barbados without much luck. The story goes that Professor Jerome Handler made his way to the plantation called Newton, and whilst there, got into a conversation with an elderly gentleman who he inquired if he knew where the enslaved were buried. And the person recounted the story told him by his grandmother that his ancestors were buried out in the middle of a cane field. They took a walk and found an open pasture of roughly 2 to 3 acres growing what Barbadians would refer to as sorrowgrass.
Indeed, an amazing discovery. But that was just the beginning. The scientists were quite prepared to dig even deeper with the hope of unearthing information that would reveal more about the enslaved buried there.
Professor Handler, along with Professor Lang and students, decided that they would carry out test excavations on the pasture to see if the oral history testimony given by the elderly gentleman was true. And it was. By the time they had done their research, done their excavations, gone into various archival sources, whether at the Barbados Museum or the Department of Archives at that time, they'd estimated that 570 persons were in fact interred in this burial space.
The site was excavated in the 1970s. Archaeologists found specimens dating back to the 18th century. They found jewelry and other artifacts which are now at display at the Barbados Museum. They disinterred and identified about 104 bodies. Scientists, more specifically osteologists, were able to make findings which gave them insight into the lifespan of the slaves, which seemed to suggest a life expectancy of around 29 years. Their research also showed evidence of starvation of the slaves and gave insight to some of their habits, such as tobacco smoking. So what now? What role is being played by Mr. Farmer and his colleagues? How does the old information impact the way forward?
In December of 2020, the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honourable Neil Motley, announced that the enslaved Burial Ground at Newton and the surrounding environs would form part of a larger project called Reclaiming Our Atlantic Destiny, which is project aims to marry both the archival documentation held within our Department of Archives and the material culture excavated from Newton to create a heritage district. One of the signature buildings to be created is in fact a memorial to the enslaved who were buried at Newton, along with other buildings. This to me is one of those seminal moments in Barbadian history that will allow us not only to reclaim our past, but to frame it in such a way that it is no longer seen as detrimental to talk about enslavement, but to recognize that we are the descendants of persons who have survived a traumatic past, and we're still slowly coming to terms with it in order to create the society in which we now live. It is extremely important for us to never forget, but it's even as important for us to continue to grow on that legacy of survival and innovation which our ancestors had to engage in order for us to be here today.
Newton Burial Ground for the Enslaved. No doubt, a piece of the rock.